University promotes diversity and the defense of the French language, as do others English-speaking universities in Quebec. And for this, I am doubly honored to introduce Mickael Tanter in French, because you know what's happened. We had some difficulties from the government based on the fact we are simply not enough promoting the French language. So this is a French guy who say that, okay? So Mickael Tanter est un physicien français. Il est directeur de recherche à l'INSERM. Il est directeur de l'Institut de physique et technologie pour la santé de Paris, à l'ESPCI. Probablement que ceux qui connaissent l'ESPCI, ils savent qu'il y a plusieurs prix Nobel de physique qui sont sortis de l'ESPCI. Donc, pour ceux qui ne connaissent pas, allez sur le site, ça vous donnera l'histoire de la physique du monde, en particulier. Il est directeur du premier accélérateur de recherche technologique à l'INSERM, en ultrasons biomédicaux. Il est spécialiste d'imagerie médicale et de thérapie par ultrason. Donc, je voudrais parcourir son impressionnante bibliographie pour situer un petit peu les réalisations qu'il a faites. D'abord, il est diplômé d'une école d'ingénieurs très connue en France qui s'appelle Supélec. Il a obtenu son doctorat à l'ESPCI. Et il a étudié l'application du concept de retournement temporel des ondes ultrasonores pour le traitement des tumeurs cancéreuses dans le cerveau. C'était un point d'ancrage, probablement ancien, mais que tu as renouvelé depuis. Il est recruté comme chercheur au CNRS d'abord, et il rejoint l'INSERM comme directeur de recherche. Et il crée l'équipe physique des ondes pour la médecine, qui est donc une unité mixte, qui appartient à l'INSERM, à l'ESPCI Paris, et puis au CNRS. Et il l'a créé à l'Institut Langevin, et il développe de nombreuses technologies biomédicales dans l'Institut Langevin, dans les domaines du diagnostic du cancer, des maladies cardiovasculaires, des neurosciences, mais aussi de la thérapie extracorporelle par ultrasons. Donc, il devient le directeur adjoint de l'Institut Langevin, puis il crée en 2019, il crée l'Institut physique pour la médecine Paris, dont il devient le premier directeur. Comme je le disais donc avant, ses travaux scientifiques sont impressionnants. Donc, je ne vais citer que les principaux. Donc, je commence par la thérapie non invasive du cerveau par ultrasons. Donc ça, c'est des travaux qui ont cheminé entre 1995 et 2015 avec ses collègues Matthias Fink et Jean-François Aubry. Mickael Tanter donc, développe le concept de focalisation transcrânienne ultrasonore qui est aujourd'hui utilisé en clinique pour la chirurgie extracorporelle du cerveau par ultrasons focalisé. En échographie ultra rapide, donc, il développe une méthode d'imagerie permettant d'augmenter d'un facteur 100 la cadence des échographes, donc passant de 50 à 10 000 images par seconde. Cette révolution dans le domaine des ultrasons permet dorénavant de capter les phénomènes physiques du corps humain se produisant dans des temps très brefs. Cette invention débouche dans la création de l'entreprise Supersonic, imagine. Première société à commercialiser un échographe ultra rapide clinique. À ce jour, donc plus de 2700, probablement beaucoup plus, donc, ont été installés dans les hôpitaux de plus de 80 pays. Donc ça, c'est vraiment très impressionnant. Dans le domaine de l'élastographie par onde de cisaillement, avec ses collègues, donc il combine l'échographie ultra rapide, c'est-à-dire 10 000 images par seconde, à la génération d'ondes de cisaillement par force radiation ultrasonore. en imageant la propagation de ces micro-vibrations au sein des organes. Donc il parvient à imager de manière quantitative la rigidité locale des tissus humains et ainsi remplacer la palpation intuitive du médecin par des méthodes d'imagerie précises à l'échelle millimétrique. Donc, en imagerie fonctionnelle du cerveau par ultrason, ça c'est une révolution aussi. Donc, j'ai suivi particulièrement ces travaux, en gros, de 2011 à 2021, je dirais. Mickael Tanter et son équipe inventent et développent cette nouvelle technique d'imagerie fonctionnelle du cerveau basée sur l'utilisation des ondes ultrasonores. Donc, cette technique appelée FUSE, pour Functional Ultrasound Imaging, permet d'imager l'activité neuronale à l'échelle du cerveau tout entier en détectant les variations subtiles du flux sanguin et les vaisseaux cérébraux avec une très très grande résolution spatiale et temporelle, comme vous pouvez l'imaginer. Donc il crée avec ses collègues la société Econeus, qui commercialise aujourd'hui le premier système de neuroimagerie par ultrason. En super résolution et microscopie ultrasonore de localisation, il invente une méthode d'imagerie permettant pour la première fois de voir de manière totalement non invasive un organe entier à l'échelle microscopique. Alors cette technique, baptisée microscopie ultrasonore de localisation, permet de voir la vascularisation d'un organe et de ses plus grosses artères jusqu'à ses composantes les plus petites, les capillaires, de manière de quelques microns de diamètre à peu près. Donc, enfin, en thérapie non intrusive des valves cardiaques par onde de choc guidée, c'est des travaux qui datent de 2008 à 2020. Donc, Mickael Tanter développe avec ses collègues physiciens et collègues cardiologues une méthode de thérapie des valves cardiaques par onde de choc ultrasonore. Ces travaux conduisent à la création d'une société, CardioWave, où les premiers essais cliniques ont été réalisés avec succès en 2020. Donc, Mickael Tanter a fait de la valorisation, comme je viens de le mentionner, donc la valorisation et transfert industriel, un axe de ses contributions scientifiques. La question a été posée ce matin, où va le RBIC? Et le RBIC pourrait aussi aller vers la valorisation de tous les travaux de toutes les équipes qui appartiennent au RBIC vers l'utilisateur qui est en bout de chaîne, qui est le patient et qui est le citoyen. Donc ça, c'est peut-être un concept à concevoir pour le futur du RBIC, à l'image des travaux qui ont été effectués par nos collègues ou des exemples qui nous ont été donnés par la suite par nos collègues. Donc, pour finir, Mickael Tanter a reçu plusieurs distinctions, donc je ne cite que quelques-unes, membre de la European Academy of Science, Grand Prix européen de la Society of Molecular Imaging, le Grand Prix de la Fondation de la Recherche Médicale, le Prix de la Médecine de la Recherche Médicale Jean Hamburger de la ville de Paris. Donc, mesdames et messieurs, mes chers collègues, veuillez vous joindre à moi pour souhaiter la bienvenue à Mickael Tanter, au RBIC et à l'Université Concordia.
Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais vraiment remercier énormément le comité organisateur du RBIC, ABIM, toute l'équipe pour cette William Feindel lecture. Je suis très touché, très honoré de faire cette présentation. Et I'm going to switch in English so that I think some people don't speak French here, so I'm going to switch in English for my presentation. I was asked to give a more personal talk about my career rather than a rigorous scientific presentation, so I'm going to try to do it. It's not simple in 45 minutes to summarize 30 years of work, so I'll try to do it, and don't be surprised, you will see perhaps some 2 or 3 unconventional slides in my presentation. Okay, so in fact, I was born the last day of year 1970 in a very small village in France, in the west of France. You see here, it's, it's this city, Paimpol, in Brittany. It's a beautiful, really a beautiful fishing village at the sea. A lot of beautiful sightseeing there. And when I was a kid, in fact, I was thinking that Paimpol was worldwide famous. And in fact, I was not so far from the truth, because in fact, I think it was really extremely famous because it's exactly at the location where you see we had this resisting village, so the indomitable Gauls, which were resisting the Roman Empire. So I like to think that I'm coming from the village of Asterix and try to defend this. So I like this because people from Bretagne, les Bretons, they are proud people, they are very hardworking people. They are also the best of friends, I think. But sometimes they are also the worst fools. So I think it's a good summary of my life. And this place, in fact, Paimpol is also worldly. It's also an important place, a strange place, an important place for science. Because at the beginning of the 20th century, perhaps the most famous scientist in our history, Marie Curie, in fact, she fell in love with this place, and she was coming every summer near Paimpol, just in front of the sea. So she built a house there, just in front of the sea. You see this house there. And she was coming every summer in Paimpol. And I remember when I was a kid, my old grandmother, grandfather, they were speaking about, with admiration, of course, of very famous scientists coming every summer in a place near our city. And here you see, for example, Marie Curie with her daughter Irene Curie, just in the bay, going fishing. So I would like to pause on this picture because you have never seen so many Nobel Prizes on such small boats, in fact. Marie Curie received 2 Nobel Prizes. She's the only one. She received the Nobel Prize in Physics and Nobel Prize in Chemistry. And her daughter, Irene, received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry 25 years later. So in fact, here you've got, I think it's unique in the human history, it's the highest ratio number of Nobel Prizes divided by size of the boat. It's unbeatable, really unbeatable. So coming back to my personal life, so you see every summer Marie Curie was coming with scientists from Paris to this small village. And in fact, 1 century later, after college, I did completely the opposite. I left my small city to go to Paris in order to do my university studies. So I arrived there, and after some years of studying science and physics, I fell in love with the physics of waves. I like a lot waves, and I decided to make a PhD, and I joined the ESPCI Paris, so École Supérieure Physique Chimie Industrielle de Paris, and I began my PhD there. And when I began my PhD, by a twist of fate, in fact, I learned that, in fact, it was exactly the place where Pierre and Marie Curie discovered radium. So you see, they had their old shabby shed here, really cold place, where they discovered radium. And in fact, they had a lot of course, it was really fundamental physics, but in fact, they had a lot of connections with medicine. Very rapidly after the discovery, 10 years later, the French government decided to create an hospital just near this small school, which is Institut du Radium. It became later Institut Curie. And in fact, you see, they had a lot of contributions, both for radiology and, of course, radiotherapy. Here you see, only a few years after the discovery of radium, there was already what we call radium bomb at Institut du Radium, where they were doing breast cancer radiotherapy in the 20s. So very, very early, more than 100 years ago. And here you see also Marie Curie, she was in a small truck where there was X-ray systems inside these trucks, and these trucks were going on the battlefield during the First World War. So it's a big story, it's a big scientific history, but in fact, at the same time, there was something very small for such fantastic people. In fact, for the discovery of radium, they had to measure very small currents. And in fact, in order to measure very small currents, Pierre Curie decided to use piezoelectric materials. And in fact, on the side, he made the theory of piezoelectricity. And the theory of piezoelectricity is what we use every day when we do ultrasound imaging, when we use an ultrasonic probe. It's done by piezoelectric materials. So in fact, 10 years later, Paul Langevin, who became the director of ESPCI, used the theory of piezoelectricity to do the first sonar experiment. So he was applying a current on a piezoelectric material in a water tank. We have the water tank in our school in Paris. So it's creating a wave, a vibration, an ultrasonic wave, and there is reverberation. And in fact, an echo is coming back on the piezoelectric material, and it is transformed into a current. So he was inventing, in fact, the sonar, and it was important because it was just before the First World War, and we had to find a way to detect German U-boats under the sea, in fact. So really, I think ultrasound is really born there, in fact, these days. And 20 years later, around 20 years later, people began to try to do not sonar for underwater acoustics, but they began to try to do sonar for the human body. So it was the beginnings of ultrasound imaging, echography. So you see, it was really complex at the beginning. The people were going into a water tank. So you see here Professor Mickael trying to do ultrasound imaging of the brain, not really easy and comfortable. Some years later, a French researcher, Leandre Pourcelot, made the first color Doppler images of the blood flow in the bifurcation of the carotid here in 1969. And then he made very small echographic device in order to go in microgravity in the Soyuz and Space Shuttle station. So here you see the first astronaut, French astronaut, Jean-Claude Baudry, who was making an echographic exam around the Earth. And of course, it has been evolving a lot thanks to technology. And in the 80s, in fact, end of the 70s, ultrasound came into clinics really widely, in fact. And I very often I say to my students, you know, when I was a fetus, during the pregnancy of my mother, in fact, I did not hear the sound of ultrasound because she didn't have an echographic exam. I was born in 70, you see, and in fact, the ultrasound came into clinics around 75 in France. Okay, so there has been a lot of evolution, technological evolution. Now it's becoming even portable. You can put it in your pocket. So it's people call this a stethoscope of the future. So it's just an echographic system. And I've been participating to this story in the last 25 years, 25 to 30 years. So here I'm going rapidly on what I was doing. So here you see exactly where is ESPCI. So you see just in the historic center of Paris, near Notre Dame, Île de la Cité. So I became a professor from INSERM in 2005, and thank you for the presentation. You did everything already. And I've been participating to the invention of different techniques, and each time we were inventing something really new, we were trying to create a spin-off company, and we've been at the origin of several spin-off companies here. Okay, so I'm going to show you the beginning of my career. I was working a lot on the therapeutic applications of ultrasound, and you've seen coming back to the early days of radiotherapy in Paris, this radium bomb. Instead of doing this, we tried with Matthias Fink, my PhD advisor, my mentor, and Jean-François Auvry, my PhD student. We tried during a long time to create ultrasound system able to focus ultrasonic waves through the skull bone in order to burn tissues with high intensity focused ultrasound. And it took a very long time, but we did this kind of systems. Here it's a 512 element system, able to go into a MR coil in order to do MR guided HIFU therapy. And there was a problem, the problem of propagation of ultrasound through the skull bone. You know, when the ultrasonic wave is going through the skull bone, it is completely distorted by the bone. So you've got what we call aberrations, and the focusing is not good. So if you are just in water, you have a way to focus properly the wave because the speed of sound is the same everywhere. So easy to focus at one location using electronic lens on an array of transmitters. Now, if you've got a medium like a skull bone with a different speed of sound, you see there is destructive interferences and you don't focus properly at focus. So at that time, in fact, we wanted to use something which is really great. It was the work by Matthias Fink, a fantastic physicist in Paris. He was working on time reversal. So here, don't be afraid, it's the only equation of my presentation. And I show you this equation, wave equation, because perhaps it's one of the most beautiful equations in physics you can find. It's a beautiful equation, partly because you see here, you've got only second order time derivative. And so it means that if you know a solution of the wave equation, so wave propagating, P of t, pressure versus time. So if you know a solution of the wave equation, you know that the time reverse version of this wave, is also a solution of the wave equation. So if you know how a wave propagates from one place to the other one, by recording the data and time reversing them, sending them in what we say in French in verlan, so it changes the sign of time, you can refocus your wave exactly as if you were playing the movie backward in time. So you can create time reversal machines for ultrasound. Of course, you don't change the direction of time, it's impossible, but you create waves that give you the impression that time has been switched in another direction. And it was interesting for many applications. It was also interesting for fundamental physics. So here you see what is nice with time reversal focusing is that it works in very complex environment, even if there is a lot of reverberations. And you see here some experiments we were doing more than 30 years ago. So there was an ultrasound wave coming from this place, going through a multiple scattering medium, and we were recording on an array of receivers here. So we made this simulation of this. So here you see the forward propagation. So the wave is emerging from this point. And the wave is going to propagate through this forest of rods here, of reverberating rods. So you've got a huge amount of noise, reverberation noise, and you record on the array of transducers here. You record the signal. So it's a very long coda, completely chaotic coda, but in fact it's deterministic noise. And then you record all this in RAM memories, and then you are going to send this wave backward in time by just changing the direction of the memory, and then you send the wave back. And if you do this, in fact, as the wave equation is time reversal invariant, you should see the movie playing backward in time. And in fact, it's exactly what happens. You see here, we are going to send back waves in this ugly medium. So it's going to take a very long time because there is a lot of reverberation to recreate in order to, at the end, to recreate the converging wavefront. And you're going to see it's working at the end. So we don't know what kind of noise we are sending there. It's very complex noise, but you see at the end, something begins to happen up and you refocus perfectly. So time reversal machines are interesting because if you know a solution of the wave equation, the time reverse version will help you to focus where you want, even if the medium is extremely complex. And we wanted to apply this with Matthias for brain application, transcranial imaging, so of transcranial therapy. So of course we cannot put a microphone inside the brain at your target location, but what we do is we acquire a CT scan of the patient. With the CT scan we have all the structure of the skull bone of the patient, and we do a simulation of the forward propagation. So we do the simulation of the forward propagation, you see it here. And then we have the position of the receivers in the simulation. We use these echoes, we time reverse them, and then we are going to send them back in real life on the patient. And in fact, if you do this through human skull bones, you see that without corrections, you have a bad focusing in the focal plane with a low intensity at focus because you've got destructive interferences at focus. But if you use time reversal focusing guided by CT scan, you see that you refocus perfectly with a very high amplitude here. And if you do this if you transmit during several seconds, you see that there is an increase of temperature of about, here it was about 10 degrees increase of temperature at a focal spot which has the size of a rice grain. So we did this research during more than 15 years, 17 years. We built the system. We transferred all the technology to one of our company. And in fact, it was too expensive for France. In fact, it was to go to clinics was really too expensive. But it's a pity because we made a lot of important work in that field. We built this system. It was fully MR compatible. And in fact, it was working well. We use it for primate at Hospital Pitié-Salpêtrière in Paris. But we were not able to have enough money in order to really go to a commercial device. And in fact, it's something that has been done by our competitors in the States. I think especially a very important people, which was Kullervo Ininen. He has been working a lot in that field too, and he has been working with Inside Tech Company and General Electric, and they invested a huge amount of money to go to do brain HIFU. So here you see an example in clinics, where they treated patients with essential tremor, so they have difficulties in all-day life because they have all this tremor constantly. And here you just have to target a small region deep into the brain and burn this region with ultrasound. So here you do it with this kind of system. So it's the Inside Tech system here. So you've got, again, a multi-element array of ultrasound focusing through the skull bone. You've got the MR guidance in order to know exactly where you are eating tissues. So it's done in awake patients, no anesthesia, no incision, no electrodes, no infections, no surgical lesions. You see after treatment, so some seconds of insonifications are able to burn tissues remotely. And you see after the treatment, you see that it's really impressive, in fact, to see this. Okay. So it was here using ultrasound in order to do thermal ablations. We try to eat tissues in the focal spot of the probe. We also try to tackle another problem with mechanical waves. Here we wanted to treat cardiac valves. It's very complex to treat cardiac valves. Today, in fact, there is especially the aortic stenosis. So it's a disease that is affecting a lot of people after 60 years old. In fact, your valves, aortic valves, are going to calcify. And as the surgery is very, very complex and risky, in fact, we are waiting very long time that the disease progresses before doing the surgery because it's really risky. So you wait that the calcification is increasing up to a point where there is a high risk of death, and then you do the surgery, and the surgery is replacing the valves by a bioprosthesis. So we had this crazy idea more than 15 years ago. Could we do this fully non-invasively? Could we repair the function of the valve? Because the valve is calcified, it is very stiff, so it is not able to open the door very nicely. So you know when you are at home, you have a door which is not opening. Usually when you have a problem like this, you try to repair the door. In clinics, here it's not the same. You take the door, you take it out, and you put a bioprosthesis. So we wanted to repair this, and to do this, we created a system where you see in red, it's a focus transducer, which is able to focus at a given location through the ribs and focusing on the valves. And we are going to create a very high amplitude wave, a shock wave, during some microseconds. So very short wave, but it's so high in pressure that it's going to be able to break the calcifications inside the valve. So we fractionate the calcification, and as you break the calcifications, you make that the valve is becoming softer. And as it's becoming softer, it's opening the door more easily. And we moved to clinics in the last years, and it's working really, really nicely. We worked with really very severe patients, not eligible anymore to surgery. And I'm going to show you a very small movie of this. So you see the system with an ultrasound probe for guidance. So it's ultrasound imaging and ultrasound therapy. So the patient is awake, non-anesthetized. So you put some gel on the chest. I'm going to see it here. Okay. Then the physician, the cardiologist, is going to put the probe on the chest and look at the echographic images. and then stabilize the system, so it blocks the system, and then he's defining his treatment planning, and he's going to define safety margins and exactly where he wants to focus in order to break the calcification inside the valve. And so we made experiments in 100 patients, and there is a strong improvement of the aortic valve opening and softening and decrease of the pressure gradient. Okay. So now I'm coming more to medical imaging. In fact, I think it's really the place where we made the most important contributions. So in parallel, in working on transcranial HIFU, at the beginning of my career, I began to work on imaging. You remember this concept of time reversal imaging. And in fact, it was interesting because you see, if you look at these fetus images in the last 30 years, so of course we see that the image quality has been improving in clinics a lot because we improve the sensors, we improve the electronics. But what is really striking in these three images is that they were acquired exactly the same way. So in the last 40 years, we did not change the way we transmit wave into the body, and we record the backscattered echoes in order to produce one ultrasound image. And as we didn't change the concepts, in fact, the basic parameters of ultrasound didn't change so much. So the temporal resolution is typically 50 frames per second. Spatial resolution is about 0.5 millimeter. Sensitivity to blood flow is 2 centimeters per second. If the flow is going slower, you don't see it. And quantitatively, quantification was not really there. It was till recently mainly a morphological imaging technology with quantification in very large vessels for hemodynamics. And we were lucky, in fact, to break all these barriers by introducing ultrafast imaging. In fact, we found a way to do an ultrafast echographic device at 10,000 frames per second. We found a way to go down to microscopy. And we increased also the sensitivity to blood flow by a factor of more than 20 to 50. And it's important because it was what helped us to go to neuroscience. So I'm going to explain you this in a few slides. And first, I have to begin with how can we make an ultrafast echographic device. So breaking the temporal resolution of ultrasound, in fact, I have to come back just on the way you do a basic echographic image in ultrasound. So you've got an ultrasonic probe with a lot of small piezoelectric elements. You are going to apply time delays on each element of the array when you transmit the signal in order to create a focused beam, and you record the backscattered echoes. And you produce like this one line of the echographic image, and then you make a second transmission on receptions, and you produce a second line in your image. So you are going to make as many transmission and receptions as there is lines in your echographic image. So typically, for a good image, you need 200 lines. So you make 200 transmission and receptions just to produce one single image. And you focus wave and you record the echoes. Instead of doing this, more than 25 years ago now, we decided to do completely the opposite. So instead of focusing wave, we decided to send plane waves. So we send a plane wave or a diverging wave in cardiac imaging. So you send a plane wave, you record the backscattered echoes coming from all these scatterers. You put this in RAM memory in your system, and then you are going to do some what we call parallel beamforming when we are an engineer. In fact, for physicists, it's what we call time reversal processing. So we use the data, and in the computer, we are going to time reverse the signals and send them back in the computer towards their initial source location. So we produce one image with one single transmission. And you see you increase the frame rate by a factor at least 200, so ultra fast imaging. So it was the first system in Paris, in Matthias' lab 25 years ago. So it was an ugly machine, 128 channels. It was a fantastic system for research because we were able to acquire, we had an analog log line amplifier. We were able to acquire up to 10,000 frames per second, but we were able to acquire only 0.5 seconds of movie. Only 0.5 seconds because we were feeding the RAM memories, and when the memories were full, it was stopped. In fact. So it was great for research, but the bad thing in 1998 was that after this, for this 0.5 seconds of acquisition, it was taking us 1 hour for transfer and computation. So some of my colleagues in the community were saying it's not an ultra-fast system, it's an ultra-slow system. So it was ultra fast for acquisition and ultra slow for calculation. And other ones were saying something which is really interesting especially for the young researchers or young students. Some people were telling me there is no interest to do ultra-fast imaging because ultrasound is the fastest modality in clinics, 50 frames per second, and the physicians has remanence of the eye at 50 frames per second. So the physician, the cardiologist or the radiologist doesn't see faster than 50 frames per second. So you don't need to go faster. It's already real-time TV of your body. And you see, it's a very big mistake, in fact, because if you manage to go in the ultra-fast world, in the world of the millisecond, catch the important information and take it back to the radiologist, you give superpower to the radiologist. He becomes a superhero. He's able to see at ultra-fast frame rate, and he's going to see new things. And it was the reason why we were convinced it was interesting, because as soon as you go ultra-fast, you are able to see in the millisecond range. And in our human body, many phenomena, for example, mechanics, biomechanics, or shear waves here, mechanical waves, are propagating at 1 meter per second. So if you send a water balloon on a friend at the beach in the summer, you have this creation of this seismic wave, and this wave is going at meters per second. Keep this in mind, meters per second. So if you want to track this wave every millimeter in your body, you need to make one image every millisecond. So you need to go ultra fast. It's the same for fiber contraction. When you bind your muscles, there is a propagation of a contraction along your fiber bundles at meters per second, 5 meters per second. So again, you need to go ultra fast to catch it. And blood flow, if you've got a stenosis in your carotid, typically you've got blood flow of about 1 meter per second, or turbulence or turbulent flow in the ventricles. So you should go ultra fast in order to have access to this kind of information. And we created this ultra-fast echographic device because we wanted to see this mechanical wave, this shear wave. It was interesting because this shear wave, its speed is directly linked to stiffness of the organ. So if it's going fast, the organ is stiff. If it's going slow, the organ is soft. So it was a way to palpate tissues and to see really the stiffness of organs. We wanted to do this because in ultrasound we have a major limitation, which is specificity, especially for cancer diagnosis. So here you see 3 breast cancer images at Institut Curie. This one, they all look a little bit the same. You see they are hypoechogenic, oval shape, horizontal oval shape with clear boundaries. But on a mechanical point of view, they are completely different. This one is a fibrotic lesion, so it's a quite soft solid. This one is an aggressive carcinoma, so it's a very stiff solid. And this one is a cyst with some particles inside, so it's really a liquid. So they are completely different on mechanical point of view, but in the echographic image, you don't see this. And it was why we wanted to use shear waves, mechanical waves, because we wanted to see these properties, biomechanical properties of breast. And unfortunately, one, of course, is malignant, the 2 other ones are benign. So we did this. Of course, you cannot throw a water balloon on the patient in the clinics. So we decided to use directly ultrasound. So we focus ultrasound inside our body during some hundreds of microseconds, and it's creating a force. We call this a radiation force. And the theory of the radiation force was done by Paul Langevin at ECPCI very long time ago, in fact. And so you focus during some hundreds of microseconds, and it's pushing tissues inside the focal spot. So you create a small earthquake there, and then when you stop the ultrasonic beam, tissues come back to their initial location. It's very tiny displacement, tenths of micrometer. So you create a very small earthquake in your body, and then the ultrasound probe is entering into an ultra-fast mode in order to see the propagation of the wave. So you see the probe is palpating and imaging the propagation of the shear wave. So you see here the palpation, so it's a zoom in an echographic image. You see at thousands of frames per second, you guess that there is a vibration propagating here. Now, by calculating the displacement from one image to the other one, you can make an image of the tissue displacement, and you see really it's human body seismology. You see the shear wave propagating in your body. Now, it's very simple. You have to calculate the speed of the shear wave because you've got this movie. And from this, you are going to be able to make a map, a quantitative map of stiffness. And here you see a fibroadenoma, which has blue was quite soft, so same stiffness as surrounding tissues, whereas here the carcinoma was 20 to 30 times stiffer than surrounding tissues. So it's a huge contrast. And if you add this value of stiffness to the diagnosis, your diagnosis done by ultrasound, you increase a lot the specificity for cancer diagnosis. So we went into clinics in 2008. So here you see we create a radiation force in this patient. So it breast here, you see the tumor is here. We create the vibration here. And here you see the movie, ultra-fast movie. So of course we don't show this to the physician. Just for our calculations. But you see clearly that the wave here in the parenchyma, LC parenchyma, is propagating slowly here. It's propagating slowly. Whereas in the tumor, it's going very fast, much faster. You see, hop, it's already gone here. So if you calculate the speed at each location, you've got a huge contrast. You see the stiffness is much, much higher in the cancer here. So we went into clinics with this system, with this ugly system, ultra slow system. And in fact, of course, it was not possible to make something happen in clinics with a commercial device if you have to use 1 hour just for calculation of 0.5 seconds. And again, it's a message for young people. Never listen to people that say it's impossible, it's impossible, it's impossible. And here, physics or basic science come always first, and then technology is coming later. And you see, we made this concept of ultra-fast imaging in 98. And in fact, technology came along 10 years later. You know this very well. In fact, these GPU boards you've got in video game systems, in PlayStation, so they are extremely powerful. And we use, in fact, naturally the exponential evolution of the computational power to know very well this Moore's law. In fact, it was taking 60 minutes for 0.5 seconds in 96, 20 minutes in 2003, 2007, 6 seconds, then 0.2 seconds here. And today, in fact, it's completely in the ultra-fast world. There is no dead time anymore. So you can acquire at thousands of frames per second in 2D imaging and treat all the data instantaneously. And we do this thanks to the exponential evolution of the computers and the advent of these GPU boards, in fact. So we had nothing to do, in fact. We made the concept, and then every year we were changing the computer. And there was an inflection point in 2007 here, where it became possible to create a first echography device, which is not with hardware chips, which is just digitalizing data and then sending everything onto GPU boards. So it was the first software-based ultrasound system in clinics, and with this company. We made the proof of concept that it was improving a lot the specificity of ultrasound for cancer, especially breast cancer. You see a 25% increase of specificity. In fact, we could reduce the number of breast biopsies by a factor 2 to 3 if we use really properly shear wave elastography in clinics. Okay, and there is a lot of applications, not only breast, because in fact stiffness is really perhaps one of the most important parameters of medicine. It was the first act of medicine, palpation, to have access to this data. So you see breast cancer, liver cancer, arterial rigidity, of course. We have the age of our arteries because our arteries are stiffening versus age. Thyroid nodules, musculoskeletic and sport medicine, tendon elasticity, muscle elasticity here, and even for brain lesions. Okay. So in 2008, after working a lot on ultra-fast imaging of mechanical waves, we decided to, with Jeremy Berkoff, a young PhD student, we decided to try to understand if we could use ultra-fast imaging to image blood flow. So on all echographic devices, you've got what we call the Doppler mode. So you just record images, ultrasonic images, and you check from one image to the next one how the amplitude in the voxel is changing. And if this is changing, the frequency of change of this voxel gives you access to the speed of the scatterer. So you've got access to blood flow just by doing ultrasound imaging. And in fact, we decided to use plane waves again to do ultra-fast imaging for Doppler, so what we call ultra-fast Doppler. So it was very interesting for very fast flows, turbulent flows, for example, in the ventricles. We were able to see very, very complex, very fast flows. But paradoxally, what was really became magic, in fact, is that we found that for very slow flow, you need to go ultra fast. So you are much more sensitive to very slow flow if you do ultra fast imaging. And in fact, it's something we found during the PhD of Jeremy. You see here, for example, the implementation of conventional Doppler imaging in the thyroid here. So you see the trachea, the blood flow feeding the thyroid in conventional Doppler. But if you do ultra fast Doppler, you become much more sensitive to slow flow. And it's paradoxal, in fact. And the reason why we increase the sensitivity is because as soon as you go ultra fast, you have a much larger amount of data, and you are much better able to separate what is just tissue motion due to cardiac or respiratory motion and blood flow. So slow flow is complex to separate from tissue motion, but with ultra-fast Doppler, you could do it really, really nicely, and you increase the sensitivity of ultrasound to blood flow by a factor of 50, sometimes 100. So we did experiments in the rat brain. So you see here conventional Doppler in the rat brain, and with ultra-fast Doppler, you begin to see a lot of things. You see the penetrating arterioles and so on. If you do it in different planes, you see during the PhD of Emily Massé, we did a lot of experiments in different planes, and you see that you've got a nice angiography modality without any contrast agents, just by using ultra-fast imaging. So when we understood that we were able to have access to small vessels, to detect the flow in small vessels, we thought that perhaps we could try for the first time to do like fMRI. So fMRI is able to see the neuronal activity thanks to the neurovascular coupling. And in fact, it was possible to try to do the same with ultrasound. So you see here, we use the neurovascular coupling. So the fact that when you've got a neuronal activity in one region of the brain, you've got locally an increase of the diameter of vessels, change of the flow, and change of the blood flow speed, in fact. So we are going to do ultra-fast Doppler imaging in rats. We vibrate the whisker, so it's a basic experiment in neuroscience. So you vibrate the whisker of the rat because you know that each location of the whisker here in the rat is linked to a position in the barrel cortex in the brain. And we did this first movie of functional ultrasound of neuronal activity. So you see when it's on here, we vibrate the whisker, and you see the activation, the increase of cerebral blood volume in the barrel cortex and also in the thalamic relay here. In this seminal paper, we also studied the epileptic seizures, and here you see, for example, you're going to see we inject 4-AP here in this region, and you see propagating, spreading depressions, cortical spreading depression, moving at typically some millimeter per minute. So the movie is accelerated here. But you see really that you've got access to hypoperfused regions, hyperperfused regions, and you see the spatiotemporal dynamics of seizures in a rat model. So a nice tool for neuroscience. And what was really extremely interesting is the fact that it's extremely sensitive, much more sensitive than MRI, because MRI is usually measuring the change of oxygenation, which are some percent, only a few percent. Whereas here, for example, for the whisker experiment, you've got an increase of cerebral blood volume by typically 40%. So you can really measure a single trial. You don't need to average the data. We managed 10 years later to extend this to 3D imaging. So here you see in the rat brain, you see again, we are going to vibrate the whisker of a rat. It's a single trial. So you're going to see the increase of blood flow during whisker stimulation here in the barrel cortex. And then some seconds later, we flash an image on a screen, and you're going to see the increase of blood flow in the superior colliculus and visual system, so visual cortex here. So it's possible to do it in 3D, even if it's quite complex today. But what is really interesting is that we can, of course, it's impossible to put an MRI system on the head of the animal, but for ultrasound, it could be possible, in fact. And it's something we have been trying hard during 10 years. So we improved a lot. So we made the first proof of concept in 2013. So the probe was quite big at that time. But we miniaturized the probes. They are extremely light now, 3 grams typically. And we can even do 3D moving experiments in mice. So you see here, you just put the probe on the head of the animal. We have a small magnet just to plug the probe directly on the mice. And you can do imaging in real time during 3D moving experiment. So one experiment I like a lot in order to show the interest of functional ultrasound is this one. So we had rats doing locomotion, so running in a corridor here, receiving rewards. So the animal is receiving rewards on both sides. And we image with an ultrasound, so the activity in a slice in the brain in real time. So the resolution is about 100 micrometer. Temporal resolution can go down to 0.1 second, even less. We could go down to 20 milliseconds for some applications. And of course, it's limited by the neurovascular coupling and the hemodynamic response function, but there is a lot of things we can do in this. And here you see the experiment, which was really, I think, showing the potential of functional ultrasound. The animal is going to move from left to right and right to left. So here in the corridor, you see the position of the animal in the corridor. And here we see the changes of blood flow in the brain, in the thalamic regions, in the hippocampus here, in the cortical regions. And you're going to see what happens. So the animal is moving from left to right. And really think about you coming, you are new in this city, you're coming for your PhD, for example, and the first day you go to the lab, you are going there by bicycle, you are extremely stressed because you don't know where you have to go, there is a lot of traffic, and you are extremely concentrated. And you do it every day during years. At the end, you can go with your bike by shaving, we should not do this, but by calling your friends, and thinking about what you are going to do tonight without any problem. So you're learning a lot, and it's exactly this kind of experiment you see here. So the animal at the beginning of the experiment, you see there is a lot of changes of blood flow here in the cortical regions, and not so much changes in the hippocampus. And after 10 to 13 minutes, you begin to see differences. So here, for each run, you begin to see that during the locomotion, you see an increase of blood flow in the hippocampus here. You see? Up. And after 30 minutes, you're going to see that there is almost no changes anymore in the cortex, but huge changes in the hippocampus. So here you really see that the hippocampus begins to learn a lot and to memorize the task. And here, if you average these early runs, intermediate runs, and late runs, you see the potentiation of the hippocampus during the experiment. In fact. Another experiment which was also interesting for highlighting the interest of functional ultrasound is trying to image during sleep. In fact, we've seen a beautiful presentation this morning on sleep, and we know that we don't know why we sleep today. There is so many hypotheses, and a lot of people have been studying non-REM sleep, but there is not so much things about REM sleep, so paradoxal sleep. And in fact, by studying with functional ultrasound sleep in rats, we found that in this plane I was showing you before, when the animal is quiet wake, you see that the change of blood flow is typically 10%, 10-20% in this plane. When the animal is active wake, typically we've got changes of about 40% increase of cerebral blood volume. And then it begins to sleep. During non-REM sleep, we've got typically 10% change of cerebral blood volume. And in REM sleep, the dogma is to say that EEG recordings looks a lot like the recordings during active wake. So on EEG recordings, they look quite the same. And in fact, here you see that on a metabolic point of view, it's completely different. So during REM sleep, we've got a huge increase of cerebral blood volume, 200%, almost everywhere in the brain. So there is a huge metabolic demand during REM sleep. Something is happening extremely important during REM sleep, in fact. So it's not necessarily linked to neurons. It could be linked to brain clearance. We don't know, in fact, what it is. And we try to understand this currently. So you see here a movie of this. So the animal is sleeping. It's a little bit accelerated. So you see it's during non-REM sleep. So we recorded with implanted electrodes. So you see here the I gamma band, theta, and so on. So during non-REM sleep, you've got, we are here. During non-REM sleep, you've got a lot of activity. Going here. It would be easier to, so we do sleep scoring, and you're going to see it. Oh. Yeah, it's going. So activity during non-REM sleep, and then we enter into REM sleep, and huge increase everywhere here in the brain of blood flow. And at the end of the REM sleep, you see the animal is going to wake up. So up, huge, and then at the end of REM sleep, up, he's waking up. So you've got all these data that can so combine with EEG that can give new insights, I think, in the understanding of REM sleep. Here it's a little bit slower. So you see that there is a lot of activities already during non-REM sleep, propagation of activities in the hippocampus, in the thalamic regions, in the cortex here, and then a huge increase during REM sleep. It's possible to study also functional connectivity during spontaneous activity in rodents, in mice and rats. And it's interesting because I think really it's easier to do compared to fMRI in animals. And we created this startup company 6 years ago, Iconeus, which is selling systems for research, for mice, rats, primates, pigeons, marmosets, a huge amount of animal models, in fact, and they move to clinics now. Okay, so it's possible to go to clinics. Of course, it's not simple because I cheated a little bit. I didn't tell everything at the beginning, otherwise you would not listen. In fact, it's possible to do fully transcranial imaging, functional ultrasound imaging in mice, so it's a perfect system for mice. But as soon as you go to rats, in fact, the skull bone becomes very sick, and in fact, you have to do a trepanation. So it's complex to do transcranial imaging with ultrasound in clinics. So it is a limitation. We try currently to do it through the temple window because it's a thinner region in humans. But you see there is drawbacks also for functional ultrasound. But there is, I always say that in fact we have a god of ultrasound that protects us because the two applications where fMRI has more difficulties, which are perioperative surgery, perioperative imaging during surgery, and human neonates. It's very complex to do functional imaging in human neonates. In fact, for these two applications, in fact, there is no bone. So during neurosurgery, you have made a trepanation, and in babies, you can go through the fontanelle. So in fact, the two applications where fMRI is a little bit weaker in clinics are applications where we could potentially use functional ultrasound as a complementary technique. So we did the proof of concept in 2017 for perioperative surgery. So the surgeon is going to resect a tumor here, and a patient is awake and he's going to make electric stimulation at different locations here on the brain in order to know where are the functional regions of the brain. We call this functional cortical mapping. 13 and 12 correspond to the sensory and motor regions of the mouse. And so here we just put the probe here, and we ask to the patient, move your mouth like this during 10 seconds. And you see here the increase of blood flow in the somato and motor regions of the mouse. And we did it on 60 patients, tons of different activations. It was working 100% of the time. So perhaps in the future it could be possible to make cortical mapping with functional ultrasound without needing to make a lot of electric stimulations. Okay. We moved also on babies through the fontanelle. So here you see conventional ultrasound imaging with a conventional echographic device through the fontanelle window. You see the blood flow in the very big vessels here. But as soon as you do ultra-fast imaging, you see that you increase the sensitivity by a factor of 50, and you really see a lot of vessels now. And you can record the functional activity. Here you're going to see an epileptic seizure. So it was the first clinical movie of functional ultrasound in humans. It was in a baby. We had a Burneville syndrome and a hemimegaencephaly. So he was resistant, drug resistant to all treatments, and he had epileptic seizures, unfortunately, every 20 minutes. So they were recording EEG, surface EEG, and we imaged, in fact, at the same time with putting the probe just near the fontanelle, we were able to image the changes in real time during seizure. So here you see the EEG recordings. We are in a seizure. And then at the end of the seizure, during the interictal events, there is a lot of vascular waves propagating at typically some centimeters per second that we were able to track. And you're going to see just 2 minutes before the next epileptic seizure, whereas we don't see something on the EEG recordings, you see there is a vascular change, a vascular precursor here. You're going to see it here, 2 minutes before the next seizure. and then later on the EEG. So ultra-fast Doppler could be more sensitive than a conventional clinical EEG system and to monitor the patient. Of course, it's great to mix both together. Yeah? Here it was just a proof of concept. So we have 4 centimeters wide, and we recorded up to 4 centimeters depth, but we could go deeper. In fact, you can see the whole brain, so you could go down to 7 centimeters, 8 centimeters in babies. And we cannot see easily the edges. So because it's a diagonal, it's a conic imaging just in front of the temple window. But it's a quite large volume. You're going to see it just here. So you see, if you do it plane by plane, you see the recording of the blood flow coming from the fontanelle. You are able to have a quite large window, and it's whole brain here. Then we fuse our data into an MRI atlas, and we began to do functional connectivity at rest, at bedside. And you see here dynamic functional connectivity between cortical regions, thalamic regions, and we compared preterm babies with term babies, and you see that there is, for preterm babies, they have weaker connection between cortex and thalamic regions here. And if you do this kind of functional connectivity recording, dynamic recording at bedside, we hope we could have perhaps more sensitive biomarkers in the early months after birth. So it was just a proof of concept, but we would like to push this out in the next years. I'm going to finish with how to break the spatial resolution. I don't want to be too long. It's okay? Yeah. So we found a way to go down to microscopy with ultrasound. I would like to show you this because, in fact, you see what we knew about the vascular system 500 years ago was this. Scientists were doing this on dead bodies, in fact. So today, in fact, in clinics, we don't do a lot better, in fact. Of course, we don't have to kill the patient to see the vascular system, but in fact, the best modalities in clinics, which are CT with contrast agent injections or MR angiography with contrast agent injection, they see big vessels, and you see they see up to typically vessels of about 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter diameter on conventional systems. And unfortunately, we don't have access to the smallest vessels, which are perhaps the most interesting ones. So you see there is a huge amount of disease that affects not the large vessels, but of course, but the small capillaries and small arterioles here. A huge amount of pathologies. And of course, these pathologies, if you are able to see the very small vessels, you will see the pathology much sooner in time, because if you see it in the large vessels, it's really, really late in the disease. So we would like to see these small vessels. And in fact, I was lucky it was in 2010, I was in the States for a course on small animal imaging. And just before me, there was one researcher that showed a slide from the work was doing Eric Betzing in the States. He invented super resolution in optics. It's a fantastic technique, really. It was a great idea. They were using a fluorophores in cells, and they are going to look at fluorophores blinking. And by just studying one single, each independent fluorophore, they were able to locate the center of fluorophores and improve the resolution of optics by a factor 20 to 30, in fact. So when I saw this, I thought that we could do exactly the same with ultrasound. Instead of using fluorophores, we are going to use microbubbles. They are 2 to 3 micrometer size. It's already our contrast agent in clinics, so it's FDA approved. You can use it by intravenous injections in patients. And what we are going to do, instead of using it with conventional ultrasound, again, we are going to do ultra-fast imaging. So we'll do ultra-fast imaging at thousands of frames per second, and we are going to see here in the rat brain this kind of movie. So you see there is a lot of information about flow, tissues in vessels, but you also see blinking things here. It's a focal spot, it's a point spread function of each individual microbubble. And if you use algorithm, such as singular value decomposition, you can completely cancel tissues and blood and keep only the trace of microbubbles. So microbubbles here, it's a spot of about 100 micrometer, but the microbubble is extremely small, in fact. A gas of about 2 micrometer size is going to create a large focal spot on our image here. So for each individual focal spot, we are going to localize the exact center of the bubble. and we increase the resolution by a factor of 50. We go down to typically 5 to 6 micrometer size in rat or mice brain. And we accumulate data in some tenths of seconds. So you see here, you track all individual microbubbles. Here it's 5 or 6 millions of bubbles. And then you are going progressively, like, you know, this impressionist painting, Seurat, he was making these paintings with just points. We do exactly the same here for the vascular system. We pinpoint locations of microbubbles. And you have at the end a microscopic image of the vascular system, but non-invasive. You are able to see at microscopic scale several centimeters away from your probe. And as you are able to track, to see the propagation, the movement of microbubbles, you can also measure the speed of flow, so the flow, the blood flow speed, diameter of vessels, and so on. So here you see it was in the rat brain ultra-fast Doppler without any contrast agents with a high sensitivity. And then if you inject microbubbles, in some tenths of seconds, you've got really access to this kind of quantitative maps of the hemodynamics, but down really to some micrometer size. We continue to work hard on this technique, and in 2022 we found a way to do dynamic ultrasound localization microscopy, what we call functional ultrasound localization microscopy. So try to see the neuronal activity through the neurovascular coupling, but with microbubbles at the microscopic scale, and it's what we did here. We vibrate the whiskers again in rats, and you can see here, for example, the raw data. So this image is produced thanks to a lot of microbubbles. So if you look into your raw data and you look at all the microbubbles going through this location here, you see this kind of tracks. So I show you really the raw data that help us to build this kind of images. So it's all the microbubbles that went through the arterioles and going into capillaries here. And you can do it during rest. You can keep the microbubbles during rest, and you can keep the microbubbles during stimulation. And you see, in fact, that there is a larger spreading, a larger perfusion during stimulation, whisker stimulation. You have access to this kind of information because you can really track with a wide field Lagrangian-like field of view each individual bubble. So here it's a movie, so we have to stroboscope the data, so repeat the experiment 20 times, average all data together, and here you're going to see you've got a temporal resolution of 1 second, and after 30 seconds you will see the vibration of the whisker. So you see really the blood flow as it is in the brain of a rat, penetrating arterioles, and then the flow in the venules. And you see here, so it's a little bit accelerated, but you can imagine that our flow in the brain is a little bit like this, in fact. And after 30 seconds, you see the increase of blood flow in the whisker, in the barrel cortex region. So now you can zoom in this data, so make the correlation with the stimulus, and you see really the activated region, but at microscopic scale. And here you see a zoom into the movie. So you see, after 30 seconds, you're going to see the increase of blood flow in the arterioles. You see the flow in the capillaries here, up, and then going back to venules, in fact. And now we work on small vessel disease, and we try to study the neurovascular coupling in the different vascular compartments. So I think there is plenty of collaboration to do with you soon. We moved to 3D. We found ways to go to 3D. Recently, we made a paper on the Langendorf setups. So it's really the cardiac myocardium in rats. So it's an excised rat heart. And we inject microbubbles, and you see the flow in the coronaries, but also in the penetrating arterioles and small vessels here. And what is really great is that as soon as you've got microbubbles, you increase the blood, the reflection, the backscattering, so it can be used in clinics for human applications through the skull bone. And we made the proof of concept some years ago. It's possible to do a microscopic angiography through the temple window. So we did it in Geneva with a friend, a radiologist there, Fabienne Perrin. So we put the probe here, just in front of the temple window in patients. We do ultrafast imaging. So you see here, the ultrasound image is really ugly. It's thousands of frames per second, but it's really ugly. But what is interesting for us is that we don't care about the image. We just want to see what is moving in the image, and it's extremely sensitive to motion. And what is moving there is microbubbles, and if we use algorithms to separate what is moving from what is not moving, you're going to see that we are going to separate the microbubbles here. And you see, so we inject intravenously Sonoview, And then we detect in some tenths of second, we detect millions of microbubbles. And the radiologist was holding the probe with his arm. So it's really free arm. And here you see at the end the image. So it's only 2D today, but it's you see really here it's a Willis circle. So you see in the center of the brain of this adult patient, you've got a vessel of about 100 micrometer here. So you begin to see very small vessels, but very deep into the brain, non-invasively. I'm going to go to comparisons with CT and MR. So you can also render the flow. So you see the flow speed and diameters. And I'm going to show you here, it's a nice example. So it's a CT scan in a patient with collaterals, arteries here, where it's complex to see what is happening there. And if you record with ultrasound localization microscopy in the same plane, you're going to see the quantitative measurements of the flow, and the resolution is going down to 550 micrometer. So it's huge amount of data, but a huge increase in resolution. So I'm going to show you another example compared to MR. So here again, complex arteries here with MR angiography, and in the same plane you're going to see what we measure with ultrasound. And the last example is really giving you a flavor of the resolution. It's an aneurysm. It's a 2 millimeter size aneurysm here in these regions, and we are going to zoom inside the CT scan. So it's the best modality in clinics today, CT with injections. So you dive into the aneurysm, you go below the CT scan resolution, you continue to zoom in, and you're going to see what we obtain with ultrasound. We see turbulence here, so a turbulent flow, a vortex, with a 20 micrometer resolution here. And then we are going to dezoom. So there is a turbulent flow in this aneurysm, and we are going to dezoom progressively so that you can see the amount of data and the resolution you've got here. So you see, dezoom, dezoom, dezoom. So the aneurysm is there. So we were just in this part here. We dezoom, dezoom, up, 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 up. So it was just there. And then you are at the scale of the whole brain here with the Willis circle and so on. Okay. So I'm going to the conclusions. You see, what is nice with ultrasound is that it's a cheap modality. It's not very expensive, so it's possible to put it in a lot of hospitals. And today it's the most widely used modality in terms of exams in clinics with plain X-ray. And you see that in the last years, really a lot of things have been changing, and we hope that it's going to happen really in clinics. Temporal resolution has been increased by a factor 100, spatial resolution also with microbubbles. Sensitivity to blood flow has been increased by a factor 100 and going to neurofunctional imaging. And I don't have time to present this, but recently we made the proof of concept of neuromodulation with very high resolution, 100 micrometer with ultrasound, using sonogenetics. And soon for neuroscience, it's going to be possible on the same probe to do functional ultrasound imaging and at the same time sonogenetic activation of subpopulation of neurons with the same probe, in fact, in the center. I would like to thank a lot of people, so I cannot cite everybody. So here it's collaboration with a lot of great people in France, in the States. I've been following and working with Guy Cloutier a long time ago. So I've got a lot of friends also in Canada and in Quebec. And also, especially my team, because it's their job. In fact, I'm just presenting beautiful images, but it's really their job. And I have to cite, I think, Mathieu Pernaut, Thomas Defieux, Charlie Demenet, Sophie Pezet. I cannot cite everybody, and all the students are really great. So thank you very much, and thank you for this lecture. I'm really touched by this. Thanks.